Good morning, everybody. I want to welcome you to the class this morning. Uh-oh, bit shaking here. And I'm going to bring up the slide deck. We are in First Kings, and we're going to look at chapter 6 and 7, the great expansion of Solomon's kingdom and the development of the temple. And it's just a fascinating part of the history of the Jewish people and the ancient Israeli state, the United Kingdom. And so there's a lot of material, archaeologically speaking, and certainly understanding what's going on as far as building such a magnificent temple. And so if we look at the slide deck, let's get right into it. We've got a lot of material today, so here we go. Melech Aleph, 6 and 7, chapter 6 and 7. Just a reminder again that David, starting with David and now under Solomon, there is this wonderful united kingdom that literally stretches from the Euphrates River far into modern northern Syria and extends all the way to what we would call modern Egypt or the Sinai Peninsula, certainly incorporating a big chunk of modern Syria, modern Jordan, the entire state of Israel as we know it today. Pretty vast kingdom. And most importantly, and we'll start to really see that today, picking up those trade routes, the trade coming up from the Tigris Euphrates on the ancient Silk Roads, and the spices coming up from the Arabian Peninsula, particularly from Yemen. And we'll very quickly see about that great kingdom that kind of saddled back from Yemen on the south and west side of the Saudi Peninsula, going over to what is today modern Eritrea, Ethiopia, a little bit of Somalia, and the great kingdom of both called Saba or Siam, and that would be the great Ethiopian kingdom at Axor and Axum. And so we have a vast kingdom. There's a great deal of wealth, and Solomon is going to use that wealth to create truly one of the wonders of the ancient world. So let's get into the next slide. Again, a little bit of reference. We're going to look at a lot of slides and archaeological and architectural archaeological facts and architectural renderings of those facts to look at what the city of David and onto Solomon might have looked like. And again, the old Jebusite, Yevusi site of Zion, David's citadel here, and then the great expansion up to Mount Moriah, the higher hill or the higher location above Mount Zion. And these are all hills. When you go to Israel, you go, wow, I can't wait to see Zion. And you'll go, that hill is Zion? So it's a spiritual ascension. It's a spiritual mount, not a physical imposing mountain. Very important, though, to so many people, so many faiths, including our own. This Temple Mount, Mount Moriah, or the place of the scene, has a rich history going back to the time of Abraham and the sacrifice of Yitzhak, Isaac, the attempted sacrifice of Yitzhak, and it is on that Temple Mount. It will be the Temple Mount, excuse me, that place. Later in the time of David, it's a threshing floor, and David has to stop the horrible plague that he has caused, and he buys that from Ahurna, and that becomes the possession of King David onto Solomon. Solomon obviously gives that possession as a place to build the temple. Now, on that mount, we see the district of Ophel, and this is a defensive wall, a very important defensive wall that Solomon built very close proximity to the Temple Mount. And you can see it here. And this defensive wall cut across here, that's where his great royal complex and palace would be. And then, of course, the great temple. There would be another outer temple that archaeologically they're just starting to try to trace and find, and they're having some success. But we'll talk a lot about this defensive wall that is called out in the narrative, and archaeologically they have found it. And the dig is really quite a spectacular story. Just the dogged determination of a wonderful Israeli, born and raised archaeologist, Ms. Mayer, and we'll talk a little bit about her in just a bit. In addition, again, several renderings, architecturally, I love these. Clearly in the narrative, Solomon's temple was as high as 52 feet. That's 5 stories. That's a 5-story modern building. And so, how tall was the front structure? We don't know for sure, but it was something that you could see from far away, and it stood on Mount Moriah, and all that area. You could certainly see the temple. Here's a different shot of again the citadel of David, Zion. And then here is Moriah, the Temple Mount, the palace complex. And you can see that there's this defensive wall right around the Temple Mount. That'll be very critical in our review this morning about what archaeology is telling us. If we go to the next slide, again, a little bit more detail. People have no idea exactly what the Palace of Solomon or the temple looked like, but they've got some creative ideas. One of the amazing things is his palace was called the Forest of Lebanon, and they believe that literally the outer perimeter was these beautiful colonnades, and it felt as if the entire palace was elevated or floating. And then he had magnificent kind of a throne room where people could come in and the envoys could present their tribute and their gifts, and Solomon could render judgment. And then, of course, the great temple. And so this is a great, I think, a great slide that kind of, perhaps, we don't know for sure, shows what the Temple Mount looked like. He built specifically a very special house for the daughter of Pharaoh. His incredibly important alliance with Egypt. That means the whole southern and western flank is protected through an alliance with the Pharaoh, the kingdom, or the king of Egypt. So wonderful to speculate. I love when good thinking, good archaeological rendering can tell us something. But you see this defensive wall right here going around, specifically the temple. And we're going to archaeologically see that after 3,000 years. Took about 30 years to come to the point where it was excavated and absolutely verified that this was what's called 10th century, the 900s BC, right at the time of Solomon. And then again, what we have is narratives, but the narratives tell us that the temple was this amazing structure with these amazing colonnades, 2 of them, a place for washing and preparing the sacrifice, burning the sacrifice, of course, cleaning. Slaughtering is a horrifically disgusting and it's just messy. And so you have blood, you have animal remains, even before you get to the point of the sacrifice. So you have to have systems and waters, well, lots of water to keep everything clean. And then, of course, within the temple, the holy place where the showbread, the menorah, the lamp always burning, uh, places where prayers, very specific, constant prayers were made, morning, afternoon, evening, and then, of course, the Holy of Holies. And then tremendous amounts of storerooms. Think of this as this incredible um, factory almost of material coming in, incense and cooked breads and wine and grains and anything and everything that people would dedicate to sacrifice. And then a huge slaughter site. It's like a meatpacking plant from Iowa in one sense. Tremendous numbers of animals being constantly slaughtered, and then they're hate to be descriptive here, their body parts prepared, skins removed. I mean, there's just a tremendous amount of work. So you got to think of the temple not as this always serene, wonderful place, but rather as a beehive of almost commercial level activity. Uh, where do all the bones go? Where do all the hides go? How much water does it take to wash away all of that blood appropriately? And then the development from an architectural standpoint to make sure that purity is constantly taken care of. I'm going to do one more slide and let's have a pause so you guys can maybe talk about this. Within the temple, these are the things we know. That there was an entrance with these great colonnades. There'll actually be two of them. They'll have specific names. And in the Holy of Holies, every morning, fresh matzah or what was called the dedicated bread was laid out, literally just sitting there in the presence of Adonai. And in the holy area, there was the great menorah. Here, the high priest would anoint certain things through the day. Prayers were made. Incense was burned constantly. So there's a lot of activity every single day in the holy, what's called the holy area of the temple. But then the Holy of Holies with this great curtain drawn across it that would only be approached once a year by the high priest. Today, the festival, it's really not a festival, it's a time of fasting and reflection and prayer, but Yom Kippur. And this is when the high priest would go in once a year to ask for the atonement of Israel. And so the Holy of Holies and then the Holy. And in the Holy of Holies was the Ark of the Covenant. And then Solomon built these massive kruvim. We get the funny little idea of Baroque cherubim. Cherubim comes from the kruvim in the Hebrew. And trust me, the kruvim were not these cute little pudgy baby angels. They were ferocious, four-winged, defensive angels, higher order than the great princes like Gabriel and Michael, Gabriel and Michael, Raphael, um, uh, always close to the presence of God. And this is why Solomon puts the kruvim within the Holy of Holies. And we have no idea what the actual Ark of the Covenant looks like, but the directions or the narratives that were given show it to be a portable ark, a box, if you will, and on top of them, the kruvim. Let's stop right there and let you guys have a break, and you can talk about this temple. Some of the things I would maybe ask are why that shape, and why a holy and then a holy of holies, and then how radically different this is than any other religion at the time. If you would go to a temple in Tyre or Assur or Nineveh or Babylon, you would ultimately find the special place where the idol representing the god was. But when you come into the Holy of Holies of the Kingdom of Israel, what you see is a abstraction, an arc, which says here, not it, but here is where the very glory of God resides. Let's take a break, and you guys can talk about why that kind of temple. Why did God lay things out that way? Okay, we're going to come back and finish up the slide deck. Today in Jerusalem, you have the Temple Mount, Al-Aqsa, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, third most holy site in Islam, the Wailing Wall or the Western Wall, which the Jewish, the Israeli community has access to, the Temple Mount itself. And of course, this wall is the building up upon the Solomonic remains of the great temple of Herod in the time of Christ. It's some beautiful shots, beautiful scenes of Jerusalem. And then I want to really kind of finish up the slide deck by talking about these wonderful archaeological discovery. It says the first book of Kings says that Solomon, king of Israel, built a defensive wall in Jerusalem. The new discovery, meaning this occurred about starting about 15, maybe 20 years ago, really being completed only in the last several years. But they found the defensive wall in Jerusalem. The new discovery is the first archaeological evidence of this structure. Ancient artifacts found in and around the complex pointed Mazar to the 10th century BC date. She's the wonderful archaeologist that discovered this. So we don't have any kings during the 10th century that could have built such a structure. Ceramics found near the wall, very important, pottery, helped to narrow the date down, being of a level of sophistication common to the second half of the 10th century, meaning the time of King Solomon, according to Mazar. And then the next slide, the 10th century BC wall is 230 feet, 70 meters long. At least that's what has remained that they've been able to find, and about 6 meters, 20 feet tall. It stands along what was then the edge of Jerusalem, between the Temple Mount and Solomon's Palace. The stone barrier is part of a defensive complex that includes a gatehouse, an adjacent building, and a guard tower, which has been only partially excavated to date. According to Elad Batzar, who led the dig for the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, over the years the structures have been partially demolished, their building materials scavenged for later structures, and what remains was buried under the rubble, Batzar said. And so what she's saying is this fabulous wall, clearly built by Solomon, stated in the narrative that we're reading in First Kings and also the Chronicles, they've now discovered. And they found that the wall, in some cases, was still intact. Of course, all of this buried, years and years and years and years of people and rebuilding of Jerusalem, Jerusalem's siege taken over, all of this through the Persian period, the Hellenist Greek period, the Roman period, the Byzantine period, on into the Arabic period. And so years and years and years of just debris and stuff covering it. But then to discover it and to find that the stones are in fact that wonderful 10th century time of Solomon, proving there was a Solomon. Our narratives are extremely accurate, and God bless good archaeology, and God bless the Israeli antiquities. And then one last slide. This character will be very important. Hiram is the king of Tyre and Sidon. He's Phoenician. We do know, again, in our narrative, he's cited, we do know that Hiram I was the Phoenician king of Tyre, according to the Hebrew Bible. His regnal or reigning years have been calculated to between 980 and 947 in succession to his father Abed-Baal. Hiram was succeeded as king of Tyre by his son Baal-Assar I. Hiram is also mentioned in the writings of Menander of Ephesus, early 2nd century, as preserved in Josephus's Against Apion, which adds to the biblical account. According to Josephus, Hiram lived for 53 years and reigned 34. He allied himself with David. His artisans built David's palace in Jerusalem. And the palace was built using these fabulous cedar logs. After David's death, Hiram maintained his alliance with David and his successor Solomon, again as an equal. And in the Hebrew, and they have correspondence from Tyre and Sidon that they've uncovered. And he says to Solomon, my brother, meaning equal. Through the alliance with Solomon, Hiram assured himself access to the major trade routes to Egypt, Arabia, and Mesopotamia. And in the next coming chapters, we'll see how this builds up the tremendous wealth of Solomon. So Hiram was real. We see it in the scriptures. Here it is archaeologically. One of his friezes that they've dug up at Tyre, and again, bringing us great assurance of the accuracy of our scriptures. Let's stop there as I go to the narrative and let you guys talk about, again, I think this is kind of a repeating theme I have. Why does God let good archaeology occur when he does? And it's wonderful when we see written in great detail in the narrative something that comes about archaeologically that says, yes, this did occur. And we'll take a pause there. And we're back again, and we're going to look at the narrative as we read about 1 Kings 6 and 7. It was the 480th year after the people of Israel had left the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziph, which is the 2nd month. Now, this is interesting, and this is a little bit of narrative forensic. The month of Ziph is not a Hebrew name for that month. The actual Hebrew name, I've got in parentheses there, is Ayar. That is a Babylonian name, Babylonian. And so this tells you, and we'll see it again, that this final editing of these narratives, it is going on in Babylon at the time of the exile. And this is something we know for a fact. It doesn't say that the histories aren't as accurate as they are, but the final people who are putting this together are using terms that they're comfortable with because they live in Babylon. And so the month of Ziph is a Babylonian month of the Hebrew Ayar. Hopefully that's clear. And these are the little forensics that helps us know when was a particular piece of scripture written. Anyway, so Solomon began to build the house of Adonai. The house which King Solomon built for Adonai was 105 feet long, 35 feet wide, 52.5 feet high. That's at 5 stories. The hall fronting the temple of the house was 35 feet long, the same as the width of the house itself, so that its 17.5 feet width extended frontward from the house. The windows he made for the house were wide on the width extending inside and narrow on the outside. So the way to describe that is they're wider outside. They kind of telescope in, which is very unique. Again, the house of the wall of against the wall of the house, he built an annex all the way around, and it went all the way around the walls of the house, including both temple and sanctuary. The lowest floor of the annex was 8 3/4 feet wide, the middle floor 10.5 feet wide, and the third floor 12.25 feet wide. For he had made the outer part of the wall of the house step-shaped, so that the beams of the annex would not have to be attached to the house walls. For the house, when under construction, were built of stone prepared at the quarry, so that no hammer, chisel, or iron tool of any kind was heard in the house while it was being built. This is the first record we have of what we call shop fabricated material. So these tremendous blocks are carefully, very accurately chiseled to perfect precision, miles away, brought into the Temple Mount, and kind of reassembled like a Tinker Toy set. That takes tremendous amounts of planning. And I believe they knew, they literally had planned out every block. They had numbered every block. They knew exactly where that block would fit. So it literally is putting a piece, it's like putting a puzzle together after you've built the material from other sources, coming in and literally planning that perfectly. What a what a tremendous statement of complexity and planning. It's just amazing. The entrance to the lowest floor was on the south side of the house. A spiral staircase went up to the middle floor and onto the third. So he built the house, and after he finished it, he put its roof on, cedar planks over the beams. Each floor of the annex surrounding the house was 8 3/4 feet high and was attached to the house with beams. And this is that wonderful beams cut from the wonderful cedars of Lebanon. And so the smell of the house is just spectacular. Then the word of the Lord came to Solomon concerning this house which you are building. If you will live according to my regulations, follow my rules, and observe my mitzvahs, and live by them, then I will establish with you my promise that I made to David your father. I will live in it among the people of Israel. I will not abandon my people Israel. So Solomon finished building the house. The insides of the walls of the house he built with boards of cedar. From the floor of the house to the inside joist of the ceiling, he covered them on the inside with wood, and he covered the floor of the house with boards of cypress. The 35-foot back portion of the house he built with boards of cedar, and from the floors to the joist, and reserved the part of the house to be a sanctuary. The especially holy place, where the rest of the house, that is the temple in front, was 70 feet long. The cedar covering the house was carved with gourds and open flowers. All was cedar, no stone was visible. In the inner part of the house, he set up the sanctuary so the Ark of the Covenant of Adonai could be placed there. The sanctuary was 35 feet long, wide, and high, so that's kind of like a perfect proportion. It was overlaid with pure gold. In front of it sat an altar, which he covered with cedar. Solomon overlaid the interior of the house with pure gold and had chains of gold placed before the sanctuary, which itself he overlaid with gold. The entire house he overlaid with gold until it was completely covered with it. I mean, there was gold everywhere. And he overlaid with gold the entire altar that belonged in the sanctuary. Inside the sanctuary, he made 2 cruvim of olive wood, each 17.5 feet high, and each of the 2 wings of the cruvim was 8 3/4 feet long, so that the distance from the end of one wing to the end of the other was 17.5 feet. These are massive, statuaries. Likewise, the wingspread of the other cruv was 17.5 feet. Both cruvim were identical in shape and size. The height of one keruv was 17.5 feet. Likewise, the other. He set the cruvim in the inner house. The wings of the cruvim were stretched out, so the wings of one touched the one wall, and the wing of the other keruv touched the other wall. Their wings touched each in the middle of the house, and he overlaid the cruvim with gold. All around the walls of the house, both the inside sanctuary and outside it, he carved figures of cruvim and palm trees and open flowers, and he overlaid the floor of the house with gold, both inside the sanctuary and outside. So the cruvim were set up as almost like symbols that God's presence and his protecting, very high order angel was there at the Holy of Holies, inside the Holy of Holies, protecting the Ark of the Covenant, which was the mercy seat that Moses had created with the ark. For the entrance to the sanctuary, he made of olive wood, set within a 5-sided door frame. On the 2 olive wood doors, he carved figures of cruvim, palm trees, and open flowers. He overlaid the doors with gold, forcing the gold into the shapes of the cruvim and palm trees as well. We don't even know how he did that to this day. For the entrance to the temple, he also made doorposts of olive wood, set with rectangular door frame. 2 doors of cypress wood. 2 leaves of one door were folding, as were the 2 leaves of the other. One of them he carved cruvim, palm trees, open flowers. overlaying them with gold fitted to the carved work. He built the inner courtyard with 3 rows of cut stone and a row of cedar beams. The foundation of the house of Adonai was laid in the 4th year in the month of Ziv, Ayar, and in the 11th year in the month of Bul, which should be Sheshvan, which is the 8th month. All parts of the house were completed exactly as designed. Thus, he was 7 years building it. And again, both those months are listed, first of all, in the Chaldean or the Babylonian language, and not listed as the Hebrew months. So we know that the writer of the scriptures is in Babylon and is using his familiar wording for those months. And we're going to stop there, give everybody a break. There's just a lot to digest. But think about the proportions, think about the preciousness of the gold and all the things that God has put into that, and maybe have some comments on why this type of temple and its dimensions and its heights. What does that tell us about, God and his nature? So we'll take a break here. And we're going to come back and close out the reading and close out some of the things I've tried to share with everyone this morning. In Kings 7, some of this, I'm just going to ask you to just read it because it's very detailed, but I'm going to hit some highlights. So after all that, Solomon built a palace for himself. So he built the temple first. That says a lot about his priorities. Then he built his own palace. For he built the house of Lebanon forest, and it was a forest, meaning when you walked in, you saw all of these amazing, pillars of cedar. It was 175 feet long. It's enormous for a building. 87 and a half feet wide, 52 and a half feet high, and on 4 rows of cedar posts. So it literally sat on cedar posts. It kind of elevated with cedar beams on the post. It had a roof made of cedar and supported by beams lying on 45 posts, 15 in a row. And again, if you read through the narrative, it'll tell you all about his palace. There's a couple of things I want to highlight. He made the hall of the throne his place for dispensing justice. That is the hall of judgment. It was covered with cedar from floor to ceiling. His own living quarters in the other courtyard, set back from the hall, were similarly designed. He also made a house like this, the hall of Pharaoh's daughter, which Solomon had taken as his wife. All these buildings were made of expensive stone blocks, cut to measure, finished by saws in the inner surface, as well as the outer ones. There was no cement, there was no mortar. It was perfectly cut, and when they were placed, there was an absolute flush, monolithic surface. So the level of craftsmanship here is just amazing. And so he dresses it out with costly stones. Again, I can't imagine the tremendous, pleasing smell just to walk in, all that cedar everywhere. And then King Solomon sent for Hiram. Here comes Hiram again. Brought him from Zor. He was the son of a widow from the tribe of Naphtali. His father was from Zor, a bronze worker filled with wisdom. And so God, through Hiram, finds these great craftsmen. And in essence, they build these beautiful 2 pillars at the entrance to the temple. And they're even given names. Here we go. He erected the columns in the hall of the temple. On erecting the right column, he gave it the name Yakin. And on erecting the left column, he named it Boaz. And these are massive bronze pillars that will sit in front of the temple. On top of the columns were shapes like lilies. Thus, the work of the columns was finished. And he cast the great sea, the circular 17 and a half foot rim, 8 3/4 feet high, 52 and a half feet in circumference. And this is where all of the water needed to function in the temple would be collected. It had a handbreadth thick. Its rim was made of the rim like a cup. It had a capacity of 11,000 gallons of water. That's a tremendous amount of water. But again, the temple takes all of that. And then their trolleys were made to work everything. I won't get into all the details of the trolleys. You can read that yourself. They had axles they were able to push around. And as I mentioned earlier, it was like a factory with all kinds of things going on. Just each of the trolleys had about 220 gallons of water capacity. And again, think of it as this beehive of activity, prayers and incense and the cooking of bread, the slaughtering of animals, the processing of the animal parts, and then all of that blood that has to be washed away. And then we'll close out with this. Hiram made the ash pots, the shovels, the sprinkling basins. With that, Hiram completed all the work he had done for King Solomon in the house of Adonai, the 2 columns, the 2 moldings of the capitals on top of the columns, the 2 netting coverings, the 2 moldings of the capitals on top of the columns, 400 pomegranates, and it kind of goes on just on those columns. All these articles that Hiram made for King Solomon in the house of Adonai were burnished bronze. That's a tremendous amount of bronze. The king cast them in the plains of the Yarden and the clay ground between Sukkot and Zazzarn. Solomon did not weigh any of these objects because there were so many of them. Thus, the total weight of bronze could not be determined. It was just a huge amount of everything: gold, silver, bronze, jewels, everything. And then I want to close out with this. It says, all kinds of flowers and pomegranates, all kinds of equipment, especially for the holy place. Those for the house, doors of the house, that is the temple. Thus, all the work that King Solomon did in the house of Adonai was finished. After this, Solomon, Sholomon, brought in the gifts which David, his father, had dedicated, the silver, the gold, the utensils, and he put them in the treasury house of Adonai. And of course, all this was dedicated to God. As we close out my section here, and Mike will take it from there on, great discussion. All of this wealth, all of this gold and silver and bronze and precious jewels to make these beautiful, not only palace, but functioning, amazing temple. All of this wealth God allowed to happen because of giving David the unity of the kingdom, giving David the control of the trade routes, and securing Israel with tremendous wealth. And this wealth is pouring in, pouring in, pouring in. And because of that, God allows Solomon to build this fabulous temple. And my question is, as we close out, again, why is this temple so important? What does it tell us? And as maybe an assignment, you can reread the book of Hebrews to see how important the temple was during the monarchy that we'll continue to study out, but how important it was for Israel's identity. And to this day, every day, if you go to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, you will see thousands of people drawn to this Temple Mount that has such powerful historical and spiritual meaning. That's it for today. We'll close out with that and thank everyone for their attention. Please read through the chapters yourself. There's a lot of detail, and you got to have to kind of read it and absorb it, and then go back and think about it, pray about it. But this is the great temple that Solomon builds, and it sets forward forever to this day the historicity of that land and the identity of the Jewish people. So have a great time of worship. Love everyone, and I know Mike will carry on a great class. Thank you.